The things that pull us up to the mountaintops are many. They can be small things or huge things. It can be the need for space or the need for friendship. It can be the sound of flowing water or the silence of a windless day far from the modern world. Pisgah National Forest is filled with many remarkable places, but one of the most beautiful and one of the most unique is known as Graveyard Fields. This is the story of Graveyard Fields. What makes it distinctive, the challenges it faces, and how we can change its future.
Graveyard Fields is created by high mountain ridges with 6,000-foot peaks that surround a high elevation valley, and you don't see that very often in our western North Carolina forests.
This high elevation valley sits just below one of the highest ridges in the Pisgah Range and is accessible along the northwest side of the Blue Ridge Parkway.
So Graveyard Fields has become a really special place to me, and I think a lot of people, because it's so welcoming. It's important for me to bring my kids out here because I want them to value the outdoors. And so now I'm pretty determined to do everything I can going forward to not only appreciate it, but try to protect it and try to make other people realize how special it is as well.
The mystique of Graveyard Fields is more than just its curious name. For generations, people have come to this high country to see and experience this unique place. And for generations, people have been working to preserve and protect it. While its beauty can often hide much of its dramatic natural and human history, heavy use and abuse are affecting Graveyard again. Trails are often muddy and washed out. Critical and fragile habitat for threatened species is declining. And the experiences we seek at Graveyard Fields are changing. The Pisgah Conservancy and other partner organizations are concerned and are working with the U.S. Forest Service towards solutions. To gaze in wonder at nearby Looking Glass Rock and Devil's Courthouse is to see what lies under Graveyard Fields. These are the stones that raise the Appalachian Mountains. Through the millennia, streams have cut deep gorges down from the highest peaks. But underneath the valley at Graveyard Fields is gneiss and schist stone that has resisted this erosion, creating the valley. With Pisgah Ledge to the east and Graveyard Ridge and Black Balsam to the west, the Yellowstone Prong pours over the upper falls and then meanders through the heart of the valley for more than a mile, before it finally plunges over the second falls and down into the gorge below. This spine of the Pisgah Range above 5,000 feet of elevation creates a climate zone that is more similar to parts of Canada than to the southern United States, with plant and animal species suited to this habitat remaining from the last glacial period.
The open valleys are supported by wide open meadows, which have a acidic soil base, which makes them more likely to grow the heath-covered areas like the rhododendron and the laurel, also the brambles of blueberries and blackberries. The Carolina northern flying squirrel lives up in the higher reaches in the spruce fir forest here at Graveyard Fields. In the Yellowstone Prong is the native brook trout, which is our only native trout in this area. But they prefer high mountain streams with cool, clear water, and that describes the Yellowstone Prong. The black bear is native here, and also the white-tailed deer. There are high elevation mountain bog ecosystems here, which are very rare in our southern Appalachians, but they do support extremely rare, even endangered species, such as the mountain bog turtle. So there's a wide range of ecosystems all within a triangular section here, right north of the Blue Ridge Parkway.
For thousands of years, before Europeans first explored the mountains and valleys of the Pisgah Range, the Cherokee were here. The high mountains around Graveyard Fields are rich with the myths and legends of the Cherokee.
The high country to the Cherokees is a place that you go and visit to commune with the spirit. It's a magical place for the Cherokee. My people have been here for thousands and thousands of years. These were places that they would go and they would find resources. They would go there in the summer months. It was cooler there, and it was a place for us to go and maybe pick blueberries and to gather. And so our connection, I feel, runs deep.
Then, for generations, settlers slowly moved into the valleys and coves of these mountains, farming small tracts of land, but the highest points were left untouched. All that changed in the late 19th century as the Industrial Revolution began to impact the South. The primary resources that were sought were the virgin forest of the southern Appalachian Mountains.
200 years ago, along the Pisgah Ridge, you would have seen no human activity at all. None. Would have been a complete wilderness.
By the 1880s, lumber companies had purchased much of this land and began working both sides of the Pisgah Range, building railroads and using steam-powered equipment to cut and slash the trees out of the forest.
They basically went up the rivers and creeks to the high country, and the red spruce that they wanted and needed was all on the higher ridges.
Huge railroad trestles, temporary villages, and remote logging camps followed the railroad up as the logs came down. By the time they reached Graveyard Fields during the 1920s, a rail spur snaked around Graveyard Ridge, with cabled skidders pulling logs from the valley floor. The area much more resembled an industrial work site than the pristine valley we see today.
We can't believe that all this was here. We can't believe that there was a railroad up here. We can't believe that there were camps up here. And I really don't think I would have loved to have seen what was left behind.
The name Graveyard Fields evokes much curiosity and folklore and seems to have originated from a few different events. One possibility was recorded in 1882 by a group of bear hunters. What they saw was that a massive windstorm had blown down the impressive spruce forest that had thrived in the rich soil of the valley, leaving behind mounds and holes that would resemble a giant burial site. But another event that contributed to the name was an intense and catastrophic fire that incinerated the area in 1925, ending the logging on Pisgah Ridge and leaving behind a wasteland.
There was a logging train that sparked a fire November 1925, and it scorched 25,000 acres. It was a hot, raging fire that was fueled by the debris and the downfall that had been left by the logging companies.
It had been dry all year long. 1925 was a real dry year, and it kept burning for well over a month.
The fire then burned not only a huge amount of area, but it scorched down into several layers of the soil. It was susceptible to heavy rainfall and washed away many of the minerals and nutrients that were valuable for plant regrowth.
The fire and erosion removed the earlier graveyard mounds, but left the entire area dotted with scorched tree stumps that once again gave it a graveyard-like appearance.
The first time I saw it was probably 67 or 68, right around in there, so about 50 years ago. And there was a lot of grass, very few trees. There were lots and lots of stumps that were still there. They were probably about knee-high, a lot of them were. And the area looked like a graveyard. I mean, it literally did look like a graveyard.
In 1936, this land, including Graveyard Fields Valley, was sold to the U.S. Forest Service, joining the Pisgah National Forest, which had been established in 1916 after the death of George Vanderbilt, using much of the land he had preserved. graveyard fields began to slowly recover. In the 1940s, concerned citizens donated a penny for each tree, and the Civilian Conservation Corps began replanting spruce trees on the high ridges around Graveyard. But the valley itself was left to the slow process of natural regeneration. But as the scars healed, a massive project that would eventually bring millions of people to the area was underway: the building of the Blue Ridge Parkway. Construction of the parkway section from Mount Pisgah to Graveyard Fields began in 1938 with dynamite and bulldozers carving a gently winding motor road through these ancient mountains. As it was being completed in September of 1941, the National Park Service drew plans for a dam and a lake in Graveyard Fields, along with a campground and service station. But World War II began and all the projects were stopped. But the parkway had opened the door for people and hiking clubs to explore Graveyard Fields like never before. Organized in the 1920s, Asheville's Carolina Mountain Club had long been exploring the high country. But in the 1950s, the Trail Club began mapping and building trails in the area. Then in the 1960s, volunteer groups orchestrated a successful campaign that designated more than 25,000 acres around Graveyard Fields as wilderness areas. Volunteers have long been instrumental in forging trails that have been enjoyed for generations of visitors. Today, Graveyard Fields and the high country around it is one of the most popular and heavily used areas in Pisgah National Forest.
Graveyard Fields is well loved. It's well visited, and rightly so. It's a gorgeous place here. And so in this area that has suffered fires, floods, erosion, and hardships over the years, I'm afraid that the most challenging impact that it faces today is the human impact.
The Pisgah Conservancy was formed in 2015 and is dedicated to the well-being and betterment of the Pisgah Ranger District.
Welcome to the 4th annual Pisgah Pride Day.
They provide critical funding to help maintain the vast network of trails and amenities to high standards, while growing and protecting this treasure for future generations. Today, the legacy of stewardship to preserve Graveyard Fields continues as new efforts are underway to respond to the heavy use and to restore and protect Graveyard. With a generous grant from the Lastinger Family Foundation, the Pisgah Conservancy and its partner, the U.S. Forest Service, are also working in close coordination with the National Park Service to develop plans for projects that will repair and restore the heavily used and eroded trails, with hiker-friendly sustainable trails, bridging, and wayfinding enhancements. Live staking of natural plants and grasses will be used to help restore damaged areas of the Yellowstone Prom. And another critical aspect of the project will be the planting of native red spruce trees in selected areas in and around Graveyard Fields. These trees will restore and expand the native habitat of the high country and are key for many species, including the northern Carolina flying squirrel. With no road access into the Graveyard Fields Valley, getting supplies for these projects where they're needed is complex, sensitive, and costly. This is where the Pisgah Conservancy and its supporters and volunteers can be essential to this restoration work.
I think one thing people don't realize is that Pisgah National Forest is the second most visited national forest in the entire country. And there's small things that you can do. Just try to take the main trail. Don't take shortcuts. Try, if you see a piece of litter, just pick it up. And then consider joining in one of the work days.
So I think it's important to maintain the trails and just to teach people to respect the land. So I think if people know a little bit about the history of a certain area, that they can come to respect it more and be thankful for what we have.
We care what happens to the land. Even if it's not in our name, we care about it. I'm hoping that people will pick up the cause and continue to take care of these places.
And I've just seen time and time again, whether it's healing or community or solitude or a challenge or stillness, the trail has so many ways of meeting those individual needs and giving people what it is they're seeking. And so I really believe that being outdoors and hiking on the trail is one of the most powerful catalysts for change that we have in our society.
We should continue loving Graveyard Fields. Let it teach us more about the environment. Let it help us become more connected with our natural world, but at the same time, protect it for the next generation so that they can love it the way we do.
To find out more about the detailed plans for the projects underway at Graveyard Fields, visit the Pisgah Conservancy website. There, you'll be able to find ways to contribute your time or your funding to the restoration and preservation efforts that are so critically needed at Graveyard Fields.